Hi, welcome to Tech Talks. Today we're answering three parent questions about kids and cell phones. I'm Dr. Emily Weinstein.
And I'm Dr. Jackie Nesi.
We're psychologists, moms, and longtime tech researchers at Harvard and Brown, respectively. We love this stuff and specifically using research and evidence to take the guilt and shame and uncertainty out of tech parenting. Okay, so one question we always get is how do I know if my kid is ready for a phone?
This is such a good question. And this is a question that we get all the time. I feel like it's one of the number one things on parents' minds, especially if they have kids in this preteen, early teen phase. And so we like to think about this as 4 R's. So the 4 R's for knowing how your kid or when your kid is ready for a phone. Okay, so the first R is reasons. So, what are your and their reasons for getting a phone or wanting a phone? Or how are they expecting to use it? Are they going to want to be texting with it? Are they going to want to be using social media? This is something that you definitely want to talk about beforehand because you don't want to get the phone and then realize that you're on kind of different pages about that. What are some of the other R's, Emily?
Okay, the second R is responsibility. So, are they responsible? Do they know what it means to be responsible in general? Do you have any evidence that they'll be responsible or not responsible with tech? Do they follow rules you've set for other technology like TV, iPads? Do they ask before downloading new apps or watching new shows? Do they come to talk to you if they come across something that they're worried about or that they feel like they shouldn't have seen online?
Yeah, this is such a good one, this question about responsibility, because I feel like getting the phone feels like such a huge jump. But a lot of times we do have some evidence from what they've been doing previously with tech, whether it's the TV, an iPad, whatever it is, that might give you some indication about whether they are ready to take that next step for a phone. So another R is rules. Have you agreed on rules for the phone? Again, this is something you definitely want to establish in advance before you get the phone. When will they be able to use it? When will they not be able to use it? And do you expect that they'll be able to follow those rules? Have they shown you they can follow them with other devices?
And the last R is risks. So it's really important that kids understand the risks and what they're going to do if something goes wrong. Do you feel like you have a relationship that they're ready to come to you if they encounter a tricky situation on their device? Do you have a plan for managing risks like contact from strangers, inappropriate content, overuse of devices, and uncomfortable situations that might come up with their friends? These are just realities of things that come along with the territory of getting a first phone. And if you just listen to that list and you're like, wait, can I get a recap on those topics? We actually have a free resource with 10 essential conversations that we found across our work with kids and families are 10 conversations that having upfront can be really helpful and protective for kids. And so talking to them about things like who can they talk to when they're using their phone? When are they allowed to be messaging with other people? I think about this example of this one mom, Jackie, when we were doing our research with families,
Yeah.
one mom who told us that she had gotten her son a phone and she knew she didn't want it in his bedroom. So she was sleeping with it in her room at night. And one night she had forgotten to silence the phone. And she woke up in the middle of the night and it was just going off like crazy, like constant inbound messages. And she was like, what is going on? And she looked at the phone and one of her son's friends had like seemingly woken up in the middle of the night and just started messaging their group chat with like an endless stream of I think she said it was like cat memes, like just something totally like, silly, and it was going off constantly. And it's so funny because like of course we talk a lot about the importance of getting phones out of kids' bedrooms at night. We think that's really valuable, important, protective. And also, it is the case that kids just don't know when
Yeah,
they don't intuitively know, like, when is an okay time to text or call.
totally.
I remember, Jackie, I don't know if you had ever like this growing up, but I remember in my house, it was like a thing that you never called someone's landline after 9 p.m.
Yeah. I
And
know. And can you believe we had to like call and talk to their parents before we talked to our friends? Like, how
I
different.
Yeah, so different, and I remember also, like, sometimes I that was just such a hard and fast rule, like, I would
Yeah.
remember I would, like, look at the clock and be like, "Oh, it's, like, 8:57, I have to, like, start this phone I have to initiate the
Yeah.
phone call
Yeah.
before." Um, Obviously, our kids don't have that, we're not like adults aren't gatekeeping in quite the same way that they were years ago, but it
Yeah.
you can't take for granted that, like, they don't intuitively know when is too late, and it's different in different houses. And so we can help our kids with that boundary by making sure their phones are not in their rooms. But it's also really helpful to just have conversations about like when is an okay time to reach out, what are our
Totally.
boundaries or expectations.
Totally. And I think doing that in advance as much as possible is great because then you can make sure that you're really on the same page before you end up getting woken up all night because of your your child's phone going off. Um, just in case parents are curious, so the data suggests that the most common time for families to get a phone is age 12. But there is a ton of variability in this. So, we talk to parents all the time who either got phones earlier than that or they waited much much longer than that. It's really dependent on kind of the community that families are in, and what they find works for their child. So that leads to our next question, I think, that we get very frequently from parents, which is around what device should they get? What should be that first device when you decide you're ready to take the plunge to a phone? I think, families oftentimes are thinking about, oh, I need something to be able to communicate with my child, when I need to pick them up from school, or I really want something that they can use to just text their friends so that they're not always using, the family iPad or whatever it might be. So Emily, what would you say to that? What is the device that parents should get first for their kids?
First, it's so awesome to even be thinking about this, because the fact that you're thinking about the fact that there are different device
Yeah.
choices is exactly the right place to start. So I think one thing that we wish all parents knew about getting their kid their first phone is that dumber can be smarter. There are different kinds of phones you can get, and choosing a first phone that has fewer features, like a dumber phone rather than a smarter phone, can be a really smart decision for some families. It can just take some of the pressure off of having to understand every feature or monitor if the default is that the device doesn't even do certain things.
Mhm.
So one thing to consider is there actually like a dumb phone or a phone that has fewer features that is better for your family? There are also kid specific smartphones and watches. We're seeing more and more of these available, and they also come with more limited features. So your kid can do something like call and listen to music and even share their location with you, but they cannot download Instagram or freely browse the internet. So yeah, dumber can be smarter. What else, Jackie? What's on your mind about devices?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, a good place to start with this is really thinking for parents, like, what are the features that you want your child to have access to? What do you want them to be able to do? And what do you not want them to be able to do? So maybe you want them to be able to text. You want them to have music so they can listen to music. But you really don't want them to be checking social media or, you really don't want them to be playing games or whatever it might be. Each of these different devices, whether it's just like a basic flip phone, maybe a kid friendly smartphone like, Pinwheel or the Bark phone, or, something else or a smart watch, they all have a different kind of profile of features. And so that's definitely something to look into to help you make your decision. The other thing is, if you already have gotten your child a smartphone, that's okay. Like it's never too late to sort of start thinking about how you want to make that work best for them. So if you're feeling like, you got them a smartphone, but you were kind of like, oh, I kind of wish I went with a dumber phone or whatever it might be, there's always, parental controls you can put in place, just rules you can put in place around that smartphone that can make it work, I think, for you and for your child.
And I think we should say around smartphones, one reason that some parents actually look at all the device options and choose a smartphone is because there are things we can set up on smartphones like family pairing, where you actually set up from the get go family pairing, linking your devices, and then you as the parent can use settings like setting screen time limits and approving app downloads. And so this is not to say that we think dumber is always smarter for every kid all the time, but we do think actually asking this question, like which device really serves our family's needs? What features does my kid need? What am I prepared and interested in doing as the parent to make sure that I'm helping them, setting them up for a healthy, positive relationship? That can be really helpful. Um, Jackie, I feel like the last thing that we always feel like we have to say and want to say, and we wish all parents understood about this, is that the decision to get a kid their first smartphone does not have to get conflated with the decision to give them social media. Like these
Yeah.
are two separate decisions that I think so often parents feel like if I'm getting them the phone, I'm just opening the floodgates. And actually, that can be so intense for your kid and your family to be simultaneously trying to figure out how to navigate what it's like to just have a cell phone at the very same time that they're starting to use social media. So, we really love this idea of just making sure that you're thinking of those as two decisions that are totally fine to separate and that actually might have very different timing for your kids.
Totally, totally. And especially knowing that, you can, it's probably a good idea if you can to set up this sort of like learning period where they maybe have, fewer access to things, whether it's social media or other things that you're, wanting them to make sure they're doing, correctly and responsibly. Having a bit of time for them to kind of try things out and, experiment when there's not as much, free reign, I think can be really useful for families as they're learning.
Okay, so Jackie, I want to read you a specific question that I got from a parent recently, and I'm curious how you would answer it. So the question is, my child just got her first phone, and I'm really struggling with how closely I should be monitoring. She's 13, and I want her to have privacy and independence, but I also want to keep an eye on her because I know there's a lot of dangerous stuff out there. What would you recommend?
Oh my gosh, this is such a common question. When you say, Emily, this is like one of the biggest questions we get from parents around phones is how closely should I be monitoring? I think this is sort of, in some ways, this is what this is very sort of a microcosm for what it's like to raise teens because, you're constantly trying to balance, I think, their independence and their need for independence with really wanting to keep them safe and protect them from things that they maybe aren't ready to be seeing or experiencing. And that's definitely happening when it comes to figuring out how much to monitor a device and a phone in particular. So the first thing I'll say on this is that this is a very individual decision. So this is different families have totally different perspectives and approaches to this. And I think that is okay. I actually think that the research would support the idea that this isn't going to work the same for every family. It really depends on the child. It depends on the parents. It depends on the dynamic and sort of what you want to do and feel good about doing. There's no evidence that you have to monitor your child's device. There's also no evidence that if you set that up, appropriately, that it's going to be harmful to monitor the device. So I think it's really going to depend on families, but just some considerations I think for families to think about when they're deciding kind of how closely to monitor. One might be just the child's age or maturity. Younger kids or kids who are just getting their first device, you might want to keep a closer eye just to make sure that they're learning, to do things responsibly. You may not have a great sense of sort of what they're doing on there. And so it may be a good idea to keep a closer eye. And then as they get older, it's very appropriate and makes a lot of sense to kind of loosen the reins a little bit. The other thing I'll say is that this should, no matter what, the decision to kind of monitor your child's device, this should be done with a plan. So we definitely would not suggest, spying or sort of looking at your kid's device, except in the most extreme circumstances without their knowledge. So making a plan in advance with your child of how this is going to work, how you're going to make sure you're on the same page about what's happening on the device is really critical.
Jackie, can you walk us through, like, if you were talking to one of your kids and you were, let's say, I know your kids are younger, let's say you had a teen or one of the teens that you've worked with in your therapy practice, like,
Mm-hmm.
what would you actually advise a parent to say? What's something that they could say to just like set the expectation up
Yeah.
front? I'm going to be monitoring.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. I think, and a great question. I think that one of the things that you really want to focus on is trust, because I think parents are worried that if they decide to sort of keep an eye on what's happening on the device, that their child is going to think they don't trust them or that it's going to create some sort of issues with trust. And so that's the thing I would lead with. I would lead with saying, I trust you and I trust that you know what you're doing on your device. At the same time, it's my job to keep you safe. And, everyone makes mistakes. We know you're still learning. I want to make sure that, I can help you learn and figure things out as you start using a phone. And then I think you can discuss with them the plan. So whether it's, that you're going to do kind of quick spot checks of the phone once in a while, whether you're going to sit with them and together they're going to, give you a little tour of what they're doing on the device day to day. whether you're going to share passwords or not share passwords. These are all things that, you can establish as part of your, monitoring plan. Do you have anything else to add, Emily?
Yeah, I would just say one of the things that's really important is you were giving a lot of examples I think we feel like are very appropriate for younger
Yeah.
for tweens and teens if you're doing a first phone with a younger
Yeah.
teenager. As teens get older, they crave, need, and deserve
Yeah.
in order to develop more privacy. And so one of the things that's really important is just making sure that if you start with more involvement, because with your 12-year-old, that feels extremely appropriate,
Yeah.
you're going to want to communicate to them up front and also make an agreement with yourself that you're going to kind of opt for gradual release as they get older, meaning like less involvement, stepping back. And certainly like the same thing that's appropriate where we're like, okay, we might do a spot check with a 12-year-old, have them know we're going to do that, and really have them feel like that's part of how we are helping them learn how to use their device and remember that things aren't private. That same practice just becomes completely invasive if we have a
Yeah.
17-year-old. And so
Totally.
understanding and thinking about that and knowing that kids actually really need that independence, trust, and
Yeah.
autonomy as they become older teens, that's critical for healthy development. And we want to respect and trust their boundaries, especially as they're getting older.
Yeah. Such a
Um,
good point. Such a good point.
all right. So I think the other thing that's worth saying about monitoring is that I think that when we talk about monitoring, Jackie, you were just talking about the idea that there are actually different ways you could do this.
Yeah.
Um, we have this whole kind of like menu in mind, I think, of you and me do, of like ways that we have heard parents thinking about monitoring. And I don't think that they're necessarily all obvious. So let's talk about what some of them are. I think like a first one is obviously
Yeah.
using features and settings. So some people actually like to use a software or family pairing or something that actually provides like direct access and monitoring of their kids' devices. You can maybe see their conversations. And so actually using like software, using features, using settings to do monitoring,
Yeah.
that's an option. Those are sort of technical monitoring
Right.
strategies.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, another option I think is really just to sit near them while they're using a device. So, like Emily, I don't know if when you were growing up, like your parents would, you'd be watching TV and your parents would just like pop in the room and like take a look at the TV and be like, "Oh, what's going on there?" and like make a quick
Or like
comment.
the worst moment. I would be like, oh my God.
Always, yeah, always the worst moment.
Like,
Yeah, and then they would
Aisha,
stand and
why
watch
are
for
you
a
taking
minute.
them
Yeah.
off?
So
Nothing against
embarrassing.
Aisha, by the way. Loved that.
So there
Watching.
unfortunately I think is not always a great digital age equivalent to that, just because obviously what kids are doing are often on devices that are just harder to look at. um, but some families do something like they set a rule where the phone can only be used in sort of public places in the house, so not in a bedroom. And it just, I think having a teen or preteen kind of use their device in, say the living room or the kitchen, it's just sort of a reminder that it's not, that what they're doing on there is not always private, even though it can really feel that way when you're on a phone. And so I think that can be another option. It just gives you opportunities to ask them, what they're up to on there, and to sort of keep a little bit of an eye kind of peeking over their shoulders. So that's another option too.
And again, in both of those scenarios we just outlined, we would say like your kids should know that's happening. That is not meant
Totally.
to be something that is happening um, behind
Right.
their backs. I co-wrote this book Behind Their Screens, and my co-author Carrie and I wrote about this idea that really resonated with us. We've seen this, other researchers talk about this too, this idea that we really want kids to know we have their backs. We don't just want to
Mhm.
be looking over their shoulders all the
Yeah.
time. And really we're looking over their shoulders as part of our effort to have their backs. And so making
Mm,
sure that they know that and that is the tone. Um, it's also the case though that there are conversations that they have with their friends that like we would not sit in the room and eavesdrop on. And so
yeah.
just thinking about that as part of this, um,
Totally.
I think is really
Totally.
valuable. Okay, so another one is using tech together. There is a ton of research on the benefits of co-use or like watching a TV show together or a video together, using tech together, playing a game together. So if there's a video game they love or an app they're excited about or like a viral video that they're cracking up about, like, feel free to ask them if you can join them, and to really think about investing some time in having that like joyful kind of fun experience together.
Totally. Yeah. I love that you bring up that research, the research on co-use, because I think that is something that's very clear from the literature that this is something that works and is important both for your relationship with your child more generally and also their relationship with tech. Related to that, you can ask them for a little tour of their tech. So, what that would look like is they could basically walk you through, say, the app they're using, how it works, who they're talking to on there, what they like to do on there, what they're watching, what they're posting. They can kind of walk you through all the different pieces of that. So that's an option. Another option is thinking about how you might share passwords. So families have very different approaches to this, I think. Sometimes this is just sort of an open thing and passwords are shared. Sometimes it's something like, the child will write down the password and you'll put it in a place and not look at it unless there's something, some sort of emergency that you're really worried about and you feel like you need to then use the password to get into their account. I think this is something to just think carefully about, particularly because we don't necessarily want to encourage the practice of sharing passwords. And so I think that just thinking about this carefully and making sure it's something that feels good to you and your child is important when it comes to the password question.
Jackie, I feel like we also, just as we're talking about monitoring and we're talking about the idea of looking at text messages, I know you do too, the Lisa Damour's idea about the sort of full body scan. Will you explain
Totally.
that?
Yes. So Lisa Damore is a psychologist whose work we would highly recommend. And she has this great metaphor for monitoring devices, which is about a full body scan. So, if there's something called, the CT full body scan that you can get if you would like to monitor what's happening with your health. And in many cases, it will pick up on issues that you may not have known were there, which is a great thing. But in many cases, it might pick up on issues that you didn't really want to know about, or maybe you can't do much about. And if we think about applying that to looking at our kids' devices, it's kind of a similar thing. You may pick up if you're monitoring on things that you want to know about, but you might also see some stuff that you kind of just wish you hadn't known in the first place. And so it speaks to this idea too of having a plan, like what will you do if you come across something that you're not happy about, and what things will rise to the level of you think you need to address them versus not. Those are all questions to be thinking about in advance.
We started this conversation, I think, with emphasizing this idea that we want our kids to know that we trust them. And it's really hard for our kids to believe that we trust them if we are constantly showing them with our behavior that we actually don't. And so I think one of the most important things is, as you're figuring out what is right for your family, of course, we all want to keep our kids safe. We also want to build trust in our relationships. And when it comes to phones, we want them to come to us, not hide from us when things go wrong. And so making sure that we are setting the tone for that and that we are setting up whatever our approach is around monitoring and support or privacy, that we are doing that with the spirit of communicating to them, we trust you and this is really hard. And so we are going to use some strategies to help you learn. Jackie, I was just thinking as you were talking about this colleague that I had, who obviously worked in our space also, and I asked her about what she had said to her child, and she had I think at the time he was probably about 12 or 13, and he had a phone and he was texting, and she said it was totally their expectation and norm that she would look periodically at his text
Mm-hmm.
messages. And I knew how much she valued respect and trust in her relationship. And I wasn't a mom at the time. And I asked her, like, what did you say to him? And
Yeah.
she said, what I said to him is texts are not private. And it is really hard to remember because it feels so intimate when we're texting. It can feel so private. It's so easy to say things. We feel like we're talking just to the person we're texting with.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
there are so many reasons why texts don't stay private. And it is really hard to remember that. And we don't know if your friend is going to take a screenshot and send it to someone else. We don't know if their parents are looking at their phones. And so my job is to like help you remember that this is a really fun way to talk to your friends and it's not a private one. And so one of the ways I'm going to help you do that is once in a while we're going to look at your phone together. I'm going to look through your phone. And it was really transparent and upfront. Some parents might be listening to that being like, that works for me. I'm totally going to use that. Others might
Yeah.
be like, wow, that just does not resonate with my approach to parenting.
Totally.
I love hearing how
Yeah,
parents talk to kids about these kinds of decisions, though, because I think that it helps give us some ideas of like what does and doesn't jive with our own parenting
totally.
styles.
Mhm.
And I think that
Totally, and I feel like it's just a good reminder that with all of these questions, this is a really individual choice, and different families make different decisions, and that's okay. And I think that parents can you can find what works for your family, and there's not always, unfortunately, there's not always one right answer to these things.
all right, so here is a recap of this conversation as we're closing it out. How do I
Right.
know if my kid is ready for a phone? Consider the 4 R's. What are their reasons and your reasons for getting a phone? Are they responsible? Have they demonstrated responsibility? Rules, do you have them in place? Do you know what kind of ground rules you'll set? And if not, do you want to take some time up front to think about what kind of rules feel like they make sense for your family? And risks, what are the risks that you want to make sure they understand? Do they know what to do if something goes wrong, and will they come to you in those situations?
Next, what device should I get? Dumber can be smarter. Remember, there are a lot of options when it comes to first devices, and you don't have to dive right into giving them access to everything, including social media. Sometimes something like a flip phone or a kid friendly smartphone, or even just a smartphone with a lot of parental controls, these can be a right first step for your first device.
And finally, should I monitor my kid's phone? This is going to depend a lot on the kid, their age, your relationship with them. Your goal, of course, is to give them enough privacy and autonomy that they can develop their own relationships and feel that we respect their privacy. At the same time, we want to hold that alongside our desire to keep them safe and help them learn how to use this technology that comes along with a lot of complexities and risks. So there are a bunch of different monitoring strategies you can consider, from spot checks to co-use, sharing passwords, which is a mixed bag for many families, but whatever you choose, make sure it's communicated clearly up front and it's supporting the ultimate goal we have, which is to build trust, not undercut it. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Tech Talks. We will see you next time.